Hello, everyone. Welcome to LexTalk World Talk Show presented by ClickAway Creators. Today, we have Mr. Zafar Khurshid with us. He is founding partner at Talwar Khurshid Chauhan LLP, New Delhi, India. Thank you so much for joining us, Zafar. We are pleased to have you with us today.
All right, thanks, Vinay. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure for us to have you on the show. And we have some very quick questions that we would like to ask you to know more about yourself. And we would also like to take some learnings, some key takeaways from your journey so far. And I'm sure a lot of legal professionals, a lot of young legal professionals, or students who are still in the law schools would be able to take a lot of learnings out of that. Moving on to my first question, Zafar, if you can please brief us about your journey so far from your personal and professional background.
Sure, yeah. So I'm born and bred in Delhi, though my mother is from South India and my father ancestrally is from UP. So I'm a Mangalorean Pathan, which is I hope that I feel that I've got the best and the worst of both worlds from my family lineage, which is that I'm a Pathan, so I don't get sick as often. But I'm a Mangalorean, but to the shame of my mother, I don't like fish or pickle. Uh, I did my schooling here in Delhi at in Delhi Public School, R.K. Puram, which I mean I'm very proud to be from there, and of course we have a very vast alumnus network here in Delhi. And after that, I did my undergraduate in the history honors at St. Stephen's College. Again, I'm very proud to be associated with that entity, and I formed some of my greatest friendships, I think, in those initial years. Following my bachelor's in history, I did my LLB from Delhi University, CLC, which I would say that that was a great experience for me because it wasn't just about the great friendships and the networking that was done, and especially if you're practicing in Delhi, it's a great advantage. You'll find that half the judiciary and half the practicing advocates are from probably from campus law, not if not campus law center, then from Delhi University. So I did my basic schooling and my bachelor's here in Delhi. Following which, I spent a few years abroad for pursuing multiple master's degrees. As my family liked to joke, I was in the habit of collecting degrees. I did my I did my LLM in intellectual property law at Queen Mary, which is where I first really developed both my passion for the academic study of law and also my very key interest in intellectual property law. Of course, I was already a field that I was interested in when I did my LLB at Campus Law Center. In no short part because of the professor who taught me, who's now the PIC. He's the professor in charge at Campus Law Center, and that's wonderful. But Queen Mary is really where my passion for intellectual property grew. Um, it's as part of the University of London. Queen Mary has an excellent program in intellectual property law, if I do say so myself, and I'm sure many others would tell you as well. And as part of that, I got involved with a research project with QMEPRI, which is the Queen Mary Intellectual Property Research Institute. And I got involved in multiple fellowships. And that's really, I think, whereas I had always obviously developed an interest in law, that's really where my passion and my understanding of how wide one's appreciation of the law can and should be, I think that's really where that began and really started to take fruit. And following that, I spent 2 years at the University of Oxford, where I did the BCL, followed by a year spent in research, again in intellectual property law. I was looking at intellectual property law and the growing technology area of 3D printing. So that was my academic experience. In between, before I should jump back, before I went to Queen Mary, I got my first uh, position in the law under the then ASG, Additional Solicitor General of India, Mr. Gaurav Banerjee, who is to this day a wonderful leading practitioner of the law in India. And I would say that working under him, I really got a sense of what a professional legal working experience can and should be. It's a very interesting tidbit that in our office, there were 4 or 5 juniors, I being the most junior amongst them. And there was, of course, Mr. Banerjee. And we all referred to each other as sir. There was no, I mean, we really felt like there was no hierarchy, even though there were juniors of his who had been with him for 6, 7 years, obviously amazingly qualified as in their own right, now practicing independently as leading advocates in their respective states. But that that equality and that fraternity that I felt in that office, that was I would say that now down the line, having started my own firm, that's a key learning experience that I got from there. But it's not about hierarchy; it's about fraternity, and that's the case not just in your own office, but in a larger legal field or in the field of law generally. And I think that's a wonderful atmosphere that he built, and hopefully I've inculcated some of that. So after I finished in Oxford, I came back to India, and I've been practicing again in India since 2016. I spent 3 years working with Mr. Zafar Khurshid, who's a senior advocate, who's my father, and I worked with him practicing primarily in the Supreme Court. But I think that the unique experience that I got working with him was that unlike perhaps some seniors, his practice was very prolific. And in assisting him, I got wonderful opportunities to expand my own experience with the law. It wasn't just about practicing in the Supreme Court. We were taking up cases in the High Court, in the various tribunals in Delhi, the Green Tribunal, the NCLT, the NCLAT. So I would say that's where that was my experience. That's how I grew. And then finally, when it came to 2000 and at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, a plan that had been in the working since my undergraduate days of teaming up with some very close friends, some very long time friendships, long time colleagues, partnering up with them to bring our own unique experiences, our very varied experiences and backgrounds together to form Talwar Khurshid Chauhan, which is the firm that we started at the end of 2019, towards the beginning of 2020. And that's been my journey so far. I won't be so arrogant as to not admit that I have, coming from a legal background, coming from a legal family, I obviously had opportunities, and I can only hope that I did those opportunities justice, and that those who gave me the leg up, who gave me the shoulders to stand on, I can only hope that in the coming years I'll be able to do them proud and show that I didn't waste those opportunities.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that brief introduction about yourself. And I think you just took it right from the scratch, and you just told us maybe it feels like that you have explained your journey till yesterday. I mean, it was so fresh, and coming from you straight away really makes a lot of sense. And, I'm sure there is definitely a lot for everyone to learn and see how really, a legal professional coming from the legal family really builds that career, because it is not really it is not a profession where you can, if your father is a lawyer or if you have family members who are legal professionals, you can just jump onto an opportunity. You will still have to create those opportunities for yourselves. And as you said that your family members used to call you that you are there to hunt master degrees in different kind of so that really shows that you were passionate for different things, and you really wanted to learn, and you really wanted to add that to your kitty of knowledge. And that's the passion that you always have to have. See, I've been talking to a lot of legal professionals, and it's been almost a decade now. And one thing that I really understand is that legal profession is not something where you can learn and keep executing the same thing, because you always have to keep upgrading and updating yourself. And that's very important here. So I'm sure you will definitely make your family and your friends and your colleagues proud. Best of luck from entire LexTalk team on their behalf. Moving on to the second question now, Zafar. Can you please tell us a little bit about your most memorable case, and what are your key takeaways from there?
I think that asking any legal practitioner this question, I mean, with very few exceptions, If you ask this question of someone who's been practicing for 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, each of us will probably struggle to say which was our most memorable case. Because, of course, there are things that we can learn at any stage from any kind of case, right down to what are the mistakes that we made in procedure when we were younger, to how could we have argued a big case better, or how indeed can we learn from mistakes that we made in cases small or big. I think, though, if I really had to think about that, I would say that one very memorable case for me certainly was the triple talaq case, which came up before the constitutional bench in the Supreme Court, which many of you, many legal practitioners in India, as indeed abroad, may be familiar with. It was, of course, a seminal uh, judgment and a key issue, not just legally but politically for India. What really, I think, why that stands out in my mind is that my father, my father and boss, who was a not just a leading legal practitioner, senior advocate in the country, but also a leading Muslim leader. At least that's how he thought of himself, even if maybe some others don't necessarily think of him exactly that way. And that's fair enough. He is probably a lot more democratic and secular than most people who identify themselves as either being a certain kind of leader or not. I think that he always thinks of himself first as a leader in his community, and then then as a Muslim leader. Anyway, that aside, that case was the key. The why that case strikes me in my mind is that he felt very passionately that the Supreme Court needed to know the true position. And we filed an intervention application actually because he was not there either for the petitioner or for the respondent. And in fact, despite what many people reported, he was not there even as an amicus for the court, even though that is exactly the position that we played. We filed an intervention application, which, to the credit of the Chief Justice, he allowed. And the only goal with which we filed that application was, it was not either to take a position on whether or not what the petitioner was demanding or seeking was morally or ethically or legally correct or incorrect, or indeed to defend, even to defend the religion or guard it against constitutional or legal judicial overreach. It was simply to come before the court and say, we're here to present to you what is the position of Muslim law on this issue. Because indeed it is. Of course, we're talking about religion, but the question actually was, what was the law? In India, many people don't make a distinction between religion and personal law, but there often is. Practice is not necessarily law. How a community treats an issue is not necessarily what the religious text says. And in Islam, more than, I would say, more than any other religion, what the text says is the most important. And anything that derogates against that text is to be ignored. It is only commentary. It does not have the binding force of the law. So we were there to present that position. And I think that why that really stands out to me is that in that decision ended up with a, I would say, very close majority. It was a majority of 3-2 in favor of striking down triple talaq. That was, of course, that's the meat of it. That's how it was reported. Triple talaq is struck down. But what actually happened? The reasons that the majority judges found for doing so were very, very different. Justice Nariman, of course, picked up a legal point of saying that the law is, the Sharia is incorporated the Muslim law is incorporated by the Sharia Act. Thus, it's a codified act. Thus, it has to abide by certain provisions of the Constitution, and not being equal because it gives a certain authority to the male rather than the woman. It does not satisfy the test of equality under the Constitution. But Justice Kurian Joseph, who actually, I would say that adopted the majority of the submissions that Mr. Khurshid put forward. He said that this is not even a question that we need to go into, because what is the true position of Islam? Islam does not recognize triple talaq, which was to say that the court had the comfortable position of saying that we do not need to interfere with personal law. In fact, we are recognizing that the personal law does not recognize this form of talaq, which is exactly what we presented from the text of the Quran, from the commentaries of the Quran, that this is a practice that has evolved as often things do in the world. In a particular socio-political context, certain practices evolve. That does not change the nature of a immutable, unchangeable document. For us, it's the Constitution. When the Supreme Court interprets the Constitution, they cannot change the words of the Constitution. They can only find the meaning in the words that are there. And it was the same argument that we adopted when it came to triple talaq. And what was my key learning from this? I would say my key learning from this was that it really exemplified that the position a single person speaking the truth can have in the law. And that's an experience that I hope every practicing advocate out there gets to experience. Perhaps not it won't be on the same scale. I'm not even certain that I'll ever get to be the person before a constitutional court pleading the correct position of law and having that court be influenced by me. Perhaps I won't get that experience. I hope that I'll be able to stand in those shoes one day. But that's my key learning, is that we should never underestimate the influence that a single person speaking the truth with conviction can have. I would say that was my key learning from that experience. Now, it may be that constitutional law is not necessarily my favorite area. I don't know if I'll be able to have a similar impact in the area of intellectual property. But hopefully a case will come where I'll be able to use my experience to convince someone on the position of law, and hopefully one day I'll have a similar impact. But I would say to each practicing advocate out there that don't discount the impact that you can have on the law. A case might seem to you as ye to covered hai, ye to chota issue hai, isme ye hazaron crore ka matter thorna hai. But the law can be laid down at any stage in any matter. So put your conviction behind in your pleadings, in your drafting, in your arguing, because you never know the impact that you're going to have and when that opportunity will come.
Absolutely. I think it is a very inspirational story, and the case that you really just told us about, I think it is definitely a key learning for any practicing advocate out there, as you said. And you definitely have to make sure that you put your best effort forward, best foot forward. That's the thing that you definitely got to do without looking at the face value of a case. That doesn't really matter, because when you are getting that opportunity, you never know what it really turns out to be. So if you're not well prepared and if you're not giving your best foot forward right there, and understanding that obviously, Sir Salman definitely have that visionary approach, and he could envision that opportunity coming forward. Maybe a young lawyer might not be able to see that with lesser years of experience and with not being really faced off with big cases like that. But probably the learning for everyone here is that you always have to be well prepared, prepare more than it is required, and put your front foot at the best of your effort. So I think this is very important. It's definitely a key learning for all of us here. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Zafar, for sharing that great learning with us, and that very inspirational story. I'd like to move on to the next question with that, and let's talk about intellectual property a little bit. So, being an intellectual property lawyer, please tell us, how do you look at IP law in 2021, and how it's going to change 5 years down the line?
I think that, for better or for worse, the same thing has been said about intellectual property in India for almost, I would say, the last 5 years. It's a growing field. And that's true. I would say that we have unique opportunities right now because our law is not overdeveloped in intellectual property as it is in certain Western jurisdictions. we have not lost sight yet of the point of the law in protecting intellectual property. So we're at a key precipice that we can still learn from the judgments, from the experience of the Western courts, and apply them to the Indian context, not losing sight of the fact that we do not necessarily attribute the same value system to property, to exclusivity, to monopolization. Because of course we are a developing country, and we have a different ethos to such a different ethos, different value system to such things. We are a welfare state, we're a developing country, so we have an opportunity to not just superimpose the law as it has already developed in certain other jurisdictions, and find how it fits into our paradigm, into our judicial, legal, socio-economic system. So how do I see IP in 2021? I would say that more and more I am seeing district courts, high courts, of course the Supreme Court, coming out with judgments that are leading us in the right direction in terms of in terms of enforcement of IP, in terms of recognizing the value of IP. Having said that, we have still a ways to go. I don't know if enough education has been done on how on the legal system as it applies to intellectual property, because of course a lot of us are still thinking on the old paradigm. We can't necessarily apply all the same learnings from physical brick and mortar property law to intellectual property law, because often it won't fit. It's like trying to put a cylinder through a square peg. It won't necessarily fit. All right. So maybe sometimes you'll be able to angle it in. Maybe sometimes you'll be able to force it through, but often it just won't go through. And that's because it is not the same. Intellectual property law, the basis is not the same as property law. Traditional property law deals with resources that are finite, whereas intellectual property law often deals with resources which are infinite, do not require the same amount of input for a tremendously higher amount of output, which obviously affects how you can monetize it and how easy or difficult it is to stop someone from stealing it. So in India, I think that the law is growing. I will disclaim that I speak primarily from the perspective of copyright and trademark law, which is where I specifically specialize. I'm sure that we can say there are, of course, many developments in the area of patent law as well. India being a leading manufacturer of generic drugs, we've had run-ins, I would say, with international multinational companies when it comes to things like mandatory licensing, which again is where our value system clashes with the Western value system and how that dictates the purpose of intellectual property law. So I would say that we've had hits and misses, but it's an area that still needs a lot of growth, and that growth has to be driven not just by the judiciary, but in fact, it has to be driven by advocates. We can't forget that as advocates, we're not just there to help our client, we're there to assist the court. And when we say that we're there to assist the court, that means that we can't expect every single judge to know every single law and every single case. That's where we come in. Our duty is, of course, to be fair to our client and try and help him win his case, but to also help the court come to the correct position in the law. So we need to learn more, we need to read more, we need to appreciate how the law as it is developing in Western jurisdictions, and we need to figure out how to apply those in the Indian value system. And I think that's the key area in IP in India that needs development. The other thing that I will say is that, like for example, we have specialized now company tribunals, green tribunals. I think that it is high time that we explore the idea. We explore two ideas when it comes to intellectual property law. One is, of course, the idea of specialized courts. Again, because with the advantage, much like we have in the NCLT or the NCLAT, where you don't just have a judicial member, you have a technical member, because the purpose of that technical member is that they are providing an expertise and experience that a judicial member would have a wonderful appreciation of the law, may not have the appreciation of technical aspects when it comes to certain things, economic as because they have background in economics, because they have a background in engineering, because they have a background in such and such. So for intellectual property law, I don't see why we can't explore the idea of intellectual property tribunals. Similarly, of course, there are already decisions are made by the various registry offices and under trademark and copyright, and there are appellate boards. But at the end of the day, that is when, often they're dealing primarily with registration, with protection. But when it comes to enforcement, when it comes to infringement, we're still looking at it as a purely commercial matter. And so, of course, it comes up before a commercial court of within the judicial system, within the existing judicial system. I think that we can explore specialized intellectual property tribunals. And the purpose of that can be twofold, not just that you'll have adjudicators with specialized experience, but they're also then they can take the lead on helping to educate litigators and litigants on the importance and the key salient features and necessities of intellectual property law. I think that is the case, because with IP, and often I think that anyone will tell you unfortunately, the greatest lacuna in the judicial system in India, despite everyone's best efforts, is pendency of cases and the pace with which the legal system often works. In IP, time is an extremely key factor, extremely key factor. So we need to work on that, and we need to focus and I think be better at such things. And that's just one possibility. Specialized tribunals is one possibility in intellectual property that can be there. The other thing, of course, is that this comes down to drafting and the people who come up with the agreements, but there's no reason that arbitration and mediation can't play a greater role as well in intellectual property disputes, whether it comes to licensing, whether it comes to enforcement, infringement. Again, because time is the key factor. So these are I think that these are two things that where if we see growth, it will lead to a tremendous reinforcement of the IP system, IP regulatory system in India. If in the future we see focus and we see drive towards these two purposes.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those great insights and those suggestions. I think if we can start, developing and cultivating them, and probably, as you said, there are so many great learnings that probably we can learn from the Western countries, but that definitely has to be implemented the right way, and that has to be the right fit for the Indian constitution, Indian work culture, and a lot of different things that comes into the picture and comes very important when applying those rules and those regulations. Obviously, that amendment needs to be created accordingly. And I think you answered that question very perfectly, that these are few things that we definitely should start improving on and start working on to kind of uplift that overall ground that we have as far as the intellectual property rights are concerned in India. Once again, thank you so much for sharing those great insights on that particular question. I'll move on to the next one now. And here we want to know, what do you see are the key challenges for the legal professional in the immediate future, and how do you think professionals can respond?
Yeah, I think, I think the first and most precipitous factor, which now we all have in our mind in light of the pandemic and how that really, that really challenged and I would say disrupted the judicial legal system in India. The first key challenge that comes is that we need to start shifting away from analog. We need to become more comfortable with a hybrid system, with virtual hearings and with a more virtual online system. And that's not just because of the pandemic. That has very key advantages. I'm sure, and I do sympathize and to some extent agree with many people who are pointing out the disadvantages of not having physical hearings with particularly cumbersome matters that it can be a challenge. But that's because we don't currently have the infrastructure. So one key challenge to the legal system as we grow is that, can we look at this as a wake-up call to introduce key improvements in the infrastructure, in the system, in the legal system in India? Not just so that, you know, we're not caught off guard by something like this again, but also to help with efficiency of the system, to help with speed of the system, to help minimize costs, which is a great hindrance often to litigants and to people pursuing justice in this country. Is, can we help minimize costs? Can we help make the system easier and more efficient, uh, and 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 make ourselves competitive in the global landscape? Laying the groundwork for such infrastructure is not just going to help the domestic legal system. It's going to become a key factor in, say, attracting arbitrations from abroad. India is constantly trying to be an arbitral seat, a key arbitral hub in the world, and inevitably people point out certain shortcomings. Infrastructure and the speed of the domestic legal system are often key factors. So this is a key challenge that we must address. We must look at growing with the technology, not ignoring it, not using it piecemeal, but genuinely incorporating it into our legal system and into our legal infrastructure. Um, I will commend many judges of the High Court and of the Supreme Court who I would say even before the pandemic were emphasizing the need for this. At least in their individual courts, they were really pushing the drive for this over the years. A few names come to mind: retired Justice Badr Ahmad, of course, currently sitting Justice Waziri. I think that they're very comfortable with the online hearings and the online filing and all that, and they didn't skip a beat during this lockdown in their arbitrations, in their virtual hearings, because they had already been practicing it. They had already started making themselves comfortable with the system, and which is why I think that a lot of other people had to play catch up, essentially. Uh, I think that they've done a commendable job, that despite the overnight abruption and burden that was placed on the judicial system, maybe some people are criticizing that they took too long, but I feel that a monumental effort was made, and it is commendable. Certainly how the judiciary and how the often unthanked uh, persons behind the scenes in the control rooms, in the registry, I'm not going to say you're perfect. We all need to be better, but it's commendable how they responded, and they should get the credit for that. Let's just not stop at patting ourselves on the back and giving ourselves laurels. Let's take it as a wake-up call to improve on what we were forced to do. Now we have the opportunity to grow without being forced to do it. You know, let's not just go back to business as usual. As usual, that's one key challenge, and I think that's how we can respond. The other one is, and I think this is anyone who's in an independent practice or trying to run their own firm will tell you this: the greatest challenge they will have is that the growing demand from clients, from customers, of the what you call the more for less challenge, which is that clients don't expect to pay as much. They don't want to pay as much, uh, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. So that's always a key challenge: is how can we provide the best service to our client, the best service to a litigant, the best service to either to an individual, a partnership, a multinational. How do we do it while incurring the least costs? And the answer isn't just to hire a bunch of people who do a lot of grunt work and you pay them almost nothing, or to get lots of unpaid interns and make them do the work of your associates, and charge your client at your associate level and not pay your interns. This is not the answer. Less is more has always been a challenge, and it's one that's becoming more and more precipitous in the legal system. And I think how we have to respond is that we have to change the way we work. I'm not just talking about the larger legal infrastructure, but I'm talking about how we individually or in our offices, how we work. just as an example, at our firm, we have tried it, and certainly we'll continue to try inculcating an ethos against the strict division of teams or hierarchies. And it's all about synergizing those efforts. I would much rather, for the most part, it's great to have specialists. Absolutely wonderful. You have someone who's had 10 years of experience in a particular area of law, and within 1 second, he can do whatever you need in that. But you know what? That person's not necessarily worth as much to me as someone who has a more diverse experience. As they say, the jack of all trades, master of none, however, better than a master of one. So it's about moving away from specialization, and it's about pushing ourselves to have a more uh, diverse experience with the law, and then also coordinating with others to share that experience. It shouldn't just be about one team looks at a certain kind of matter and no one else can contribute to that. Why should we presume that no one else can contribute to that? If you have a assignment that a firm is working at across the board, of course, don't do redundant work and don't double your work, but give people the opportunity to add to something, even if they're not specialists in that field, even if their primary practice is in a different area. You might find that they will bring nuances to that a specialist might not. When you have a very keen focus, well, the thing about a keen focus is it gets narrower and narrower and narrower. So when I go like this, everything over here, I'll miss. So that's another way. That's another thing that we need to do, that firms need to do, that individual practitioners need to do. So how do firms do it? Firms do it by hiring people with diverse backgrounds and encouraging them to work across teams, work across hierarchies, work across traditional sort of compartmentalization. For individual lawyers, of course, it's not the same, but we need to let go of this unnecessary competitive edge key. No, I'm not going to share my client with someone else, or I'm not going to share work with someone else because they're going to steal my client, or that's money I could be making, why should I give it to them? Start focusing on cooperating rather than only competing. You should be competitive in the service that you provide, not necessarily competitive with your colleagues. I have personally found that when I am free and I am open about involving my colleagues with my projects, with my assignments, I not only get the wealth of their experience, but also the wealth of their background and their viewpoint, which I might not personally have. And then I should just hope that I can trust someone to work with me and not against me. And just, I think, identify a fraternity. Again, we come back to that word. Identify the fraternity that you're in, and let's work together to improve and to face the challenges that our profession is going to face. Because let's face it, when the challenges come for the profession, one firm will not be able to defeat them. One firm will not be able to overcome them without cooperation from the entire legal community. So I think these are two key challenges, addressing technology, the needs of technology and of upgrading infrastructure, and of course, the ever-present more for less. I think these are two key challenges that we can look at immediately. And on a very practical level, of course, the coming challenge in India is, do we go back to business as usual? Do we go back completely to physical hearings, as some people are advocating? Or do we now adopt this hybrid system, as at least some I would say some, we don't need to call them visionaries, but at least practicalists are supporting? Do we take up this hybrid system, and can we see the advantages in a hybrid system? That's at least in India, that's the most immediate challenge.
Amazing. Simply wow. The two key takeaways that you have really predicted or that you have really picked up are definitely, some of those key areas where we definitely need to improve if I talk about the overall Indian legal system. And sharing my thoughts on them in quick words, I have been talking to a lot of legal professionals in the Southern American countries recently, and what we have learned from there is that they were exactly at the same level where we are, or where we were before the pandemic hit us in maybe 2018, 2019. But I'll give you two quick examples. One from Mexico coming over. Mexico started incorporating and investing on those in this infrastructure and investing on those technologies way back in 2016, 2017. And by the time pandemic hit them, they were kind of 40-50% up on this already. And when the pandemic hit them, within the 6 months of time, they were able to, so the project that was supposed to end in 23, 24, they kind of did it within the 6 months, and then they were able to do 90% of their hearings online, which did not really impact the overall legal system. And obviously, as a legal professional, a lot of lawyers in India have been backlogged now with a lot of cases, and we all understand that, for a simple reason of pandemic, because they were not able to really represent their clients in the honorable court. So obviously that really made a lot of backlog for them, and the things are going to be even more crunchy, even more difficult when we actually get back to the normal. And we definitely need some or the other way to quickly probably work them around and quickly move them to up to the pace. And second example comes from Brazil, where they did not really create or develop the infrastructure. However, when the pandemic hit them, they really understood. And as all other industries, if I take an example from any other industry, every industry has really kind of had to take that as a wake-up call and start improvising or start investing in that particular thing. So I think for the legal industry also, we should do that. And Brazil started doing it. It took them obviously time, because it's not something that you can do overnight. It took them time, but in 1 year of time, starting from 2020 beginning till 2021 beginning, in the 12 months of time, they are also been able to host 25 to 30% of their hearings online. So which is again a commendable job to do. And obviously, if India has started doing it somewhere, as you gave examples of a few courts or probably judges who are doing it already, I think this is a commendable job, and I think we need to keep improving and keep working in that area. So once again, thank you so much for sharing those great insights. I'll move on to the next question of the session, I think, and this is going to be the last one for the day. Okay. Please tell us about what are some words of advice you can offer to fresh graduates looking to pursue careers in IP?
Right. I mean, the number one advice for fresh graduates, of course, this applies to IP, but I would say that applies across the board, is be sure that you're interested. Be sure that you're passionate about what you're choosing to pursue, because let me tell you that inevitably you're going to hate your job. And it's on those days that if you're really interested in this, and if you're really passionate about this, you'll find your way back to not hating your job. But be prepared that will happen. It's not going to be all rosy days. Everyone will tell you that, of course, litigation may 10 years, you have to struggle. But it's not just about the struggle. Everyone will struggle. Even those who love what they do will struggle. But the easiest way to get past that struggle is to just know that you actually are doing what you want to be doing. So with intellectual property law, be certain, be interested, because practical experience will be hard to come by when you begin. The majority of intellectual property work is not with individual practitioners. And of course, you have wonderful counsel arguing the matters in the court, but that's a very small fraction of IP. IP is built upon, if you're doing a job right, it shouldn't go to court. Okay, and the way you keep it out of court is you have to really understand the law. You have to keep reading, and it's one of the areas of law that is developing so fast that if you're not constantly studying, then you're going to fall behind. You're not going to know what you're talking about. It's great to know basic principles, but unlike, say, constitutional law or tax law, where basic principles, what you really need to know is the basic principles. In IP, you need to constantly be up to date. So अगर आपको लगता है कि पढ़ाई स्कूल में खत्म हो गई, you're very wrong. Okay, you're signing up. I mean, that goes for law generally, but especially with IP, you're signing up to constantly be studying. All right. So as much as you studied for your LLB course, as much as you studied papers and read papers for your master's course, you will constantly be doing that as a practitioner. And especially with IP, you'll have the added hurdle of needing to know not just what your country is doing, but what every other country is doing. In India, when we don't have a particular precedent in a particular area, while it's obviously not directory, or courts often do take guidance from foreign jurisdictions. So you should know what is the up to date law in the US, what is the up to date law in the UK. You may not need to concentrate on civil law jurisdictions because we're a common law jurisdiction, but you need to know what the law says, and you need to know how the judges there are applying it. So that, of course, have a passion for it. Just be ready to hate your job and have a passion for it, and if you do, you'll get over those bad days. That's the first piece of advice that I would give young graduates who want to enter the area of IP. The other is that IP is very cool and it's very fun, but practically that might not seem like that. Again, like I said, you may not have any day in court, but you would still be able to contribute tremendously in the field if you understand the practice. Even if you so there are many parts of it that you can focus on. You don't necessarily have to know everything or focus on every aspect of it. You can be someone who's focusing on say advocacy, which means you're coming to the courts, you're looking at infringement cases, you're looking at injunction cases. You can be someone who wants to work more on the regulatory side, because there are graduates should not discount the impact and certainly the contribution they can make if they have a good understanding of the law, the contribution they can make as part of the registry, as someone working in a firm that's specializing in the monitoring and registration of intellectual property law. And I would say that goes even more for designs and patents, where the monitoring and the overseeing and filing plays a very key role, even more so, I would say, than in copyright or trademark. I'll tell you one challenge that I faced when I came back having studied IP. It's so specialized, so in depth abroad. When I came back home to India to practice, it became very apparent to me right away that at least in my initial years, I'd had to choose between my passion for litigation and my passion for IP. Because as a litigator, those of you out there will know that you don't get to choose what work comes by you, and you don't say no to any work that comes by you. But as I said, a majority of IP work will, unless you get something from word of mouth and this person knows that you specialize and might come to you for advice, a majority of it is certainly for the bigger companies. It will be with large firms that have had experience, that may be specializing in IP. But if you don't want to work in a firm setup, then how do you pursue both? It'll be difficult. You'll have to stick it out. Learn the lessons from litigation, learn to develop your advocacy, and maintain your passion, your research, and your reading, and keeping up to date with intellectual property law. And when you get the opportunity, leverage your experience, leverage your speciality, your specialism, your expertise, to make sure then that you make the most of that opportunity. So admittedly, I was doing actually quite a lot of consulting, mostly through word of mouth, with some smaller organizations like NGOs and things like that. While I was pursuing my master's abroad, I was doing a lot of consultancy for IP. I don't know if I gave them the best advice then, but I gave them the best advice I could. All right. And when I came back home, when I started practicing in the Supreme Court with the senior, and even in my individual practice, even under my firm, I would say the majority of my work is not intellectual property related, but it's something that I'm pursuing. And it's something that now I know that when I get the work, I can make a contribution, and I know I can do the job because I have developed my skills in advocacy working on other matters. And I have maintained my touch with the law by constantly reading. And when I say constantly reading, it's not just about reading judgment. It's not just about hanging out in courts or waiting for pronouncements or bar and bench. There are dozens of sources from which you can keep yourself up to date. There are blogs, there are certain institutions blogs, there are individual blogs, there are private blogs, public blogs. A lot of them, I know a lot of us may not put weight in a blog as a great source of law, but don't discount it, especially in the area of intellectual property law. There are some tremendous commentary blogs out there that will help you maintain that link with intellectual property law, and that will give you the advantage of having experienced practitioners who contribute to such publications. And so I think those are the two key challenges that you may face. The challenge of how do I actually get IP work? And the thing is that don't just look for IP work. Develop your skills in advocacy. Develop your skills either in a firm or in under the tutelage of a senior or a practitioner advocate. Maintain your link with the law and keep studying. Sorry, but keep studying. And then when your opportunity comes, strike and do it well. I think that's the key. I think that's the advice that I can give to young graduates who are interested in intellectual property law.
Keep rewinding this video unless you have made notes of all of those great insights and suggestions. If you are a young legal professional looking to start your career in the IP field. Thank you so much, Zafar, for sharing such great insights. I think it was a great chat. We kind of had these questions coming from different spheres and different paradigms, but I think we were able to really create a very valuable talk out here. So thank you so much for sharing all those great insights with us. And for our viewers, if you like this chat, please like and share this video. Also subscribe to our channel, Clickaway Creators on YouTube, to have more coming from the industry leaders. Thank you so much, Zafar, once again. We would like to have another chat with you in future on some other trending topics in the IP industry and have your suggestions on them and have your advices on them for our viewers. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Vinay for LexTalk World.